It all came crashing down at Christmas dinner, the one night of the year I thought was supposed to be about peace and family. The irony is that I had paid for everything on the table, from the overpriced turkey to the cheap sparkling cider my dad preferred. I had just finished explaining a new savings plan I'd implemented, which would allow us to build a small emergency fund over the next year. It wasn't criticism. It was a financial strategy for the household I was single-handedly supporting. My father, however, took it as a personal attack on his inability to contribute, his pride wounded by the sight of his 23-year-old son acting as the head of the house. He slammed his fork down, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. My mother flinched, and my younger sister, Chloe, stared at her plate. His eyes, clouded with resentment and cheap cider, locked onto mine. He said the words that would change everything, not in a shout, but in a low, venomous growl that was far more chilling. He told me that my constant talk about money, my budgets, my plans, it all made me a burden. He said I was a heavy weight on their spirits, and that he was tired of living under the thumb of his own son, in his own house. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself, because in that moment, I saw the situation with a clarity that was almost blinding. I wasn't a son, I was an asset. I wasn't family. I was a utility, a walking, talking ATM that provided for their needs while being resented for the very function I served. The love I thought there was conditional, contingent on me providing, without ever acknowledging the reality of the arrangement. He finished his tirade by telling me to get out, that he'd rather be poor and proud than live with my suffocating presence. I just nodded slowly, a strange sense of calm washing over me. My mother started to protest weakly, a quiet, "Honey, don't," but my father's glare silenced her immediately. Chloe looked like she was about to cry, but she knew better than to interfere when our father was in one of his moods. I quietly excused myself from the table, the half-eaten meal I'd paid for growing cold. I went to my room and packed a small bag with only the essentials: my laptop, work documents, a few changes of clothes, and my personal financial records. I wasn't just leaving a home, I was divesting from a failing business, and I needed to secure my personal assets before the collapse. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch as a final act of familial deference. I stayed in my room, the door locked, and methodically began the process of financial extraction. I logged into every online account that was under my name: the electricity bill, the water bill, the internet and cable package, the streaming services, even the grocery delivery subscription. Each one was tied to my bank account, my credit card, my name. With quiet, deliberate clicks, I began removing my payment information and canceling the services where I could, or transferring the liability back to a default state. It wasn't done out of spite, but as a necessary act of survival. The internet was the first one I scheduled for disconnection. It was the artery of the house's entertainment and, more importantly, the tool my sister used for her schoolwork. I felt a pang of guilt for her, but I knew this was a necessary casualty. My father's pride had a price, and the entire family was about to learn the exact cost. The electricity and water were next. I couldn't outright cancel them without creating a massive hassle for reconnection, but I could remove my name and payment details, ensuring the next bill would default and be addressed to the property owner, my father. By morning, I had severed every financial tie I had to that household. My paycheck, which had always been deposited into a joint account for household expenses, was now rerouted to a new personal account I had opened weeks prior as a contingency. I had a small emergency fund saved there, my only real secret. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a cheap room for a few weeks and cover my immediate expenses. It was the parachute I had secretly woven for myself, thread by thread, just in case a day like this ever came. I felt a grim satisfaction that my financial prudence was paying off so immediately. I left before anyone else was awake. I didn't leave a note. My actions over the coming weeks would be my final correspondence. I walked out of the house I had financially maintained for the last 3 years without a single word. The weight I felt lifting off my shoulders was immense. It wasn't just the financial responsibility, but the emotional burden of constantly managing my parents' delicate egos, of pretending I wasn't the one keeping a roof over their heads. My father wanted me to be a burden. I was about to show him what the absence of my burden truly felt like in tangible monetary terms. I stayed with a friend for the first few days, explaining the situation in simple terms. He was understanding, offering his couch and a listening ear without judgment. My phone remained silent for the first 48 hours. I imagined the family was stewing in a self-righteous silence, my father likely basking in the glow of his victory. He had asserted his dominance, put his son in his place, and reclaimed his throne as king of a castle he couldn't afford. The quiet before the storm was almost deafening, and I used the time to secure a more permanent living situation and focus on my job. The first call came on the third day. It was my mother. Her voice was strained. She started by asking if I was okay, a transparent attempt at feigning concern before getting to the real issue. The internet had been cut off. Chloe couldn't submit her history paper and she was panicking. My mother asked if I had forgotten to pay the bill. I calmly replied that since I no longer lived there, I was no longer responsible for the household bills. I explained that my name and payment information had been removed from the account and that my father would need to set it up in his name. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could hear her processing the information, the dawning realization of what my departure truly meant. It wasn't just my physical absence. It was the removal of the financial infrastructure that kept their lives running. She stammered, asking how he was supposed to do that when he had no income. I simply reiterated my position. "That's a conversation you need to have with him," I said, my voice devoid of the emotion I was feeling. "He's the man of the house now." He made that very clear. I then politely ended the call, my heart hammering in my chest. A week later, the power went out. This time the call was from Chloe, and she was crying. She was scared of the dark and her phone was about to die. She begged me to fix it, to just call the company and pay the bill. This was harder. Hurting my sister was never my intention. She was a casualty of my father's war. I explained to her, as gently as I could, that my name wasn't on the account anymore, and that even if I wanted to, I couldn't legally pay it. I told her Dad had to handle it. She sobbed that he had been yelling at everyone for days and refused to do anything. I told her I was sorry, truly sorry, and hung up. The calls and texts became more frequent and more desperate. My mother called to tell me the water was next, that they had a final notice. She pleaded with me, saying my father was too proud to ask for help and that I was tearing the family apart. The manipulation was astonishing. I wasn't the one who had shattered the family over a Christmas dinner. I was simply the one who had stopped picking up the pieces. I told her that his pride was a luxury item, one that none of them could afford any longer. I refused to enable his delusion at my own expense. My life, in stark contrast, was beginning to improve dramatically. Without the constant drain of supporting 3 other people, my bank account was flourishing for the first time. I was able to move into a small apartment of my own, furnish it simply, and still have money left over. I invested in new clothes for work. I started eating healthier instead of buying bulk cheap food for 4. The stress that had been a constant companion for years began to recede. I was sleeping better. I felt lighter. I was reinvesting in my most valuable asset, myself. The next major development came about a month after I left. I received a furious, rambling voicemail from my father. It was the first time he had contacted me directly. He accused me of trying to destroy him, of humiliating him. He told me that he was selling the house to get away from the debts I had stuck him with. He ended the message by saying he was also selling everything I had left behind in my room, my books, my old computer, my furniture, to recoup some of the money. He called it a burden tax. That was his fatal mistake. His threat was intended to hurt me, to make me feel powerless. Instead, it gave me the final piece of leverage I needed. He had just admitted his plan to liquidate the family's primary asset for his own gain, an asset that he co-owned with my mother. Furthermore, he failed to realize that the outstanding utility bills, while no longer in my name, would still be tied to the property address. Any sale would be contingent on settling those debts first. He had unknowingly handed me the keys to his own destruction. My first call was not to him or my mother, but to the utility companies. I calmly informed them, as a concerned former resident, that a sale of the property at that address was imminent. I suggested they should ensure any outstanding balances were attached as liens to the property to guarantee payment upon closing. They were, of course, very grateful for the information and assured me they would take the necessary legal steps. This would ensure that my father wouldn't see a dime before the debts he'd incurred through his inaction were settled. My second call was to my mother. I didn't yell or gloat. I simply played her my father's voicemail. I let her listen to his own words, his plan to sell their home from under her, to sell my belongings, all without consulting her, his co-owner and wife of 25 years. I asked her one simple question: "Did you know about this?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. I could hear the sound of a deep, shattering betrayal through the phone. She had spent weeks defending him, pleading his case, only to find out he was planning to abandon her with the profits. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My mother, finally shaken from her passive compliance, confronted him. I wasn't there to witness it, but Chloe later told me it was the fight of the century. My mother realized he had no plan, no intention of taking care of them. His pride wasn't about protecting his family. It was about his own ego. Selling the house was his escape plan, a way to take the money and run, leaving her and Chloe to deal with the consequences. She saw him for who he really was, not a patriarch, but a parasite. Empowered by this revelation, my mother took decisive action. She contacted their bank and a lawyer, and within a week she had frozen their joint assets and legally blocked the sale of the house. Since she was a co-owner, his signature alone was meaningless. He was trapped. He couldn't sell the house, he had no income, and the bills were piling up with his name now firmly attached to them. He had successfully reclaimed his position as the man of the house, and he was now solely responsible for the financial ruin he had curated. The final act of his downfall was swift. My mother, with a newfound spine of steel, gave him an ultimatum. Get a job and start paying the bills or get out. For weeks he refused, clinging to the last vestiges of his wounded pride. He tried to blame me, to blame her, to blame the world for his problems. But the power was cut off again. The fridge was empty, and there was no one left to bail him out. Eventually, my mother packed his bags for him and told him to leave. The king had been dethroned and exiled from his own broken kingdom. I heard from Chloe that he was staying on friends' couches, just as I had been forced to do. But unlike me, he had no savings, no job, and a reputation for being a proud, difficult man. The charity of others began to wear thin quickly. He had become the very thing he had accused me of being, a genuine, unproductive burden on everyone he encountered. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He had projected his own greatest fear onto me, and in doing so, had manifested it for himself. It was a brutal but fitting outcome. Meanwhile, my mother underwent a transformation. Freed from his oppressive negativity and forced into self-sufficiency, she started to thrive. She picked up more hours at her part-time job, created a strict budget, and began tackling the debts one by one. Chloe got a part-time job after school to help out and contribute. They were a team. They were struggling, but they were in control of their own finances for the first time, and they were doing it together. My mother called me once, not to ask for money, but to apologize. She said she was sorry she hadn't seen the truth sooner. I started to cautiously rebuild a relationship with them, but on my own terms. I would visit for dinner sometimes, bringing groceries not as a provider, but as a guest. I helped Chloe with her college applications and offered to co-sign a student loan for her, a loan that was an investment in her future, not a bailout for a sinking ship. My financial support was now a choice, offered with love and clear boundaries, not an obligation extracted through emotional manipulation and entitlement. The dynamic had been permanently and healthily reset. At work, my performance skyrocketed. With my mind free from the constant stress of my family's financial drama, I could focus entirely on my career. I took on more challenging projects. I networked with senior colleagues, and I enrolled in an online certification course to improve my skills, something I never would have had the money or mental energy for before. The clarity and confidence I had gained from navigating my family crisis translated directly into my professional life. People started to notice my renewed drive and dedication. 6 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, I was offered a significant promotion. It came with a substantial raise, more responsibility, and a clear path for future growth. The news felt like the universe affirming the decision I had made. By cutting off a toxic financial drain, I had freed up my own capital, my time, my energy, my money, and reinvested it in myself. The return on that investment was proving to be astronomical, far exceeding anything I could have imagined. I was finally building a future that was truly my own. I bought my first car, a modest but reliable used vehicle. It was a symbol of my freedom. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without needing to rely on anyone. I started planning a small vacation, the first one I would have taken in my adult life. These were small things, but they were milestones of personal and financial independence that I had been denied for years. Each purchase, each plan, was a testament to the new life I was building for myself, one sound financial decision at a time. My father, on the other hand, continued his downward spiral. His friends grew tired of his endless complaints and his refusal to take responsibility. He bounced from one temporary living situation to another, his pride preventing him from taking the kind of low-wage job he felt was beneath him. He was a man adrift, defined only by what he had lost. He had traded his family and financial security for a brief, fleeting moment of perceived power, and the cost of that trade was his entire life. I sometimes wonder if he ever understands the full scope of his miscalculation. He saw me as a line item, a source of income to be controlled. He failed to understand that the person who manages the cash flow holds the real power. He tried to fire his asset manager without having a new source of revenue lined up. It was the most basic business error imaginable, played out in the context of a family. He ran his household into the ground with his arrogance and poor leadership. My mother and sister are slowly getting back on their feet. Their journey is difficult, but it's theirs. They are building something sustainable, something they can be proud of. My mother has even started talking about going back to school to finish the degree she abandoned when she married my father. She is rediscovering the person she was before he slowly eroded her confidence and independence. It's inspiring to watch her reclaim her own value, both personally and financially. The house, once a symbol of my oppression, is now a symbol of their resilience. They keep it clean, they make repairs they can afford, and they treat it with the respect an asset deserves. There is no more talk of selling it. It is their home, their security, and they are protecting it fiercely. My father's name has been legally removed from the deed, a final official severance from the life he chose to throw away. It's now solely in my mother's name, a testament to her victory. I have learned a powerful lesson about the nature of love and money. When they become entangled in a toxic way, money ceases to be a tool and becomes a weapon. My father used my financial support to maintain control while simultaneously resenting me for it. I learned that true generosity cannot exist without boundaries, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone and for yourself is to let them experience the full consequences of their own choices. You cannot save people from themselves. My relationship with money has been fundamentally altered. I no longer see it as merely a means of survival, but as a tool for creating freedom, opportunity, and security. I track my investments, I build my savings, and I make conscious decisions about where my resources go. I am the CEO of my own life, and I will never again allow someone else to mismanage my assets or drain my capital. The days of me being a silent, resentful ATM are over for good. My father tried to label me as a burden to mask the fact that he was the liability. He projected his own financial incompetence and dependency onto me because he couldn't face the truth about himself. He wanted to be the provider, the patriarch, but he lacked the skills, the work ethic, and the humility to do so. It was easier to cast me as the villain than to admit his own failure. In the end, the balance sheet of our lives corrected itself, and the true assets and liabilities were made clear for all to see. I still feel a lingering sadness for the family I thought I had, for the father I wished he could have been. But that grief is now overshadowed by a profound sense of peace and optimism for the future. I am no longer defined by their needs, their demands, or their emotional deficits. I am defined by my own actions, my own ambitions, and my own choices. I have taken control of my own capital, and in doing so, I have taken control of my life. The price of freedom was high, but it was worth every penny.